video. So, after making a couple of updated guides for how to jailbreak
now
the
that
PS,
we have
jailbreaks on slightly higher
I'm seeing
firmwares,
a
lot of questions in the comment section coming up over and over again. A lot of the similar questions being asked by multiple people. So what I thought I would do in this video is do a general fact
to kind
video
of
answer all of those main questions
that
I'm seeing being asked quite frequently. So that is the idea here behind this video. I'll go ahead and just throw up some gameplay
And we'll
footage.
go
over each one of these questions one by one. Starting with the first question. The most common question I've seen, which is, should you update to a higher jailbreakable firmware? If you're on, say, like a 3.x firmware or a 4.x firmware, should you update to like 5.50 or 6.50? And the reason why people are wanting to update is because there are games being dumped on those higher jailbreakable firmwares that are runnable. If you do have a PS5 on one of those higher firmwares, but those games, especially those newer games, are not runnable on much older firmwares like 3.x and 4.x. So that's why a lot of people are wanting to update so that they can access a larger library of PS5 games to play. It's not really an issue on PS4 because we have backports. We don't really have backports on PS5. Games that allow us to run newer PS5 games on older firmwares. So if you're on an older you have a much more limited selection of games that you can run. So that is an issue at the moment. And that's why a lot of people are wanting to update. The argument against updating is that we don't actually really have a full beyond jailbreak. Firmware to 0.70. The jailbreaks we have from 3.0 all the way up to 6.50 and hopefully 7.61 with when we get support K-Stuff. For it, all of those firmwares use K-Stuff, which is kind of a workaround for the hypervisor. It's not like a proper jailbreak, so in other words, there are performance impacts with K-Stuff, like slowdowns and potentially instability issues. And it also doesn't fully unlock the console in the same way that, like a full jailbreak would if we had a hypervisor exploit. So that is the kind of argument for staying on an older firmware. Is that if you update, let's say you're on 3.20 and you update to 5.50. Well, what happens if a new hypervisor exploit comes out up to 4.0? If you stayed on 3.20, you would have access to that more complete and stable jailbreak. Whereas because you updated, you now miss out on that. So that is the argument against updating. Is that we might see a hypervisor exploit at some point in the future. There's also the idea that we might eventually get backports. UH working for those newer PS5 to get games them running on the older firmware. So if you just wait a little bit longer. But there's no guarantee of that at the moment. So I'm not gonna tell you whether or not you should update. I'm just saying if you do decide that you want to play those newer PS5 games, that's fine. As long as you're aware of what you could be missing out on. If you do updates, so yeah. That is the general idea behind that. So the second question is, should I stay offline when jailbreaking the PS5? Or should I allow it to connect to the internet? Now, I'm personally in the camp of allowing it to connect to the internet. And the reason for that is it just makes using your PS5 a lot more user-friendly. Because you can use ETA Hand to install the Homebrew store, and then use the Homebrew to download other Homebrew applications. Directly to the console, you can also update the ETA Hand just from an option in the ETA Hand and it will download it to the console automatically. You know, if you're offline, you have to do all of that stuff manually by copying it to a USB. And then installing things with the package and updating the cheats through FTP or through PS5 Explorer, which definitely takes a lot and is more tedious of a process to deal with. So when it comes to avoiding system updates, if you're online, you can just disable the option to automatically install system updates in the settings, and then you can go to your network settings and add a DNS blocker as your manual DNS, and that DNS will block all system updates when you're connecting online. So that is all you really need to do to block updates, and you should be just fine. Now, as for console bans, you're generally not gonna get your console banned by jailbreaking because you're on an older firmware that cannot access PSN. So you can't really do anything to interfere with the PlayStation's online ecosystem. So you're not really gonna. You're not even connecting to PSN even though you are connecting to the internet. So that is not really much of an issue either. I mean, just for context, I have a jailbroken PS4 that can be reverted to older firmwares, where I have, run the jailbreak multiple times. I have Homebrew and a bunch of other stuff that you could only install on the console if it was jailbroken. I've updated it to the latest firmware to play online and play PSN. And that console has also been shown in numerous videos, where all of the console's details and unique identifying information has been revealed to the public. in videos, and despite all of that, my console is still not banned. So really, you're not likely to get banned by connecting to the internet and jailbreaking on an older firmware. Now, another thing that also gets
What
asked
if my
console is already console banned? Is that gonna prevent me from using the jailbreak? And no, there shouldn't be any reason why. You can't jailbreak a console that is console banned, because at the end of the day, a console ban just prevents you from connecting to PSN anyway. And you cannot do that on a jailbroken PS5 since you're on an older firmware. So there is no real difference there in jailbreaking a console that is banned versus unbanned. So the next question that I've seen quite a few people asking is there any benefit to upgrading from a jailbroken PS to a jailbroken PS5? You know, should I just stick with my jailbroken PS4? Or should I bother trying to get a jailbroken PS5? Well, generally, if you're happy with your jailbroken there's PS4, no real reason why you need to update on. There are some benefits and downsides to switching to obviously, a PS5. If you want to play PS5 games, then upgrading to a jailbroken PS5 there makes sense. There are a few downsides and advantages for games on a jailbroken PS5. Obviously, you can run all the same PS for games that you can on the PS4. But there are issues getting DLC working at the moment, where DLC content installed as fake packages actually does not apply the DLC content to your game. So you actually have to end up merging the DLC as part of the update file and reinstalling it back on the game to get it working. So that's an extra hoop that you have to jump through. You can use IdleSauce's DLC patcher for that, which you know makes it pretty convenient. But it's still an extra hoop that you have to jump through DLC to get PS4 working on the PS5, which is something you don't have to deal with on the PS4. And on top of that, there are some games that have weird audio bugs or lag when running on the PS5, likely as a result of case stuff, where it does cause some problems with some PS4 games, but that is pretty rare. I've only had one game that's had an issue like that so far. But besides that, PS4 games run without any major issues. And then one big benefit of upgrading to a jailbroken PS4 games is the 60 FPS patches from Illusion, which can allow you to basically double the frame rate from 30 to 60. And the advantage running on a PS5, since it's so much more powerful, is you can still keep the game running at its native resolution and just double the frame rate without any real frame drops. So you can get a solid 60 FPS experience. Some PS4 games even have patches that allow them to reach frame rates of like 90 to 120 FPS as well, so you can get much better performance with your PS4 when running on the PS5. And yes, there are 60 FPS patches on the PS4 as well, for jailbroken PS4. But the problem with that is that the PS4 is just not very powerful. So you have to lower the resolution 20p to push the frame rates higher. And even then, you still get wild frame rate fluctuations, where the frame rate goes all over the place, from like the low 30s to the 50s. And you're never really getting a consistent 60 FPS on the PS4, whereas you're pretty much always getting it on the PS5 without having to sacrifice the resolution. So that's one big benefit of switching to a jailbroken for your PS4 games. So the next question is, does jailbreaking damage the console? And this is particularly comes up when it comes to console crashes. Because when you run the jailbreak, it's not 100% successful, you know. It does not have a 100% success rate. So that means that occasionally, when you try to run the jailbreak, it will end up crashing the console, and the console will just turn off. And it acts as if you've just, unplugged the power cable while it was running. Because it's what's known as a kernel panic. It just shuts off immediately. It doesn't properly shut down, so when you turn the console back on, you get a warning message saying it was shut down improperly, and it could cause damage. So generally, in terms of the hardware, you're not really going to cause any damage. You know, maybe you could say over a really long period of time, like 15, 20 years perhaps, you are reducing the lifespan of your console a little bit, because of more power cycles than you would normally have if it wasn't jailbroken. So maybe over a long period of time, you could make that argument. And then also, if you have like a disk that's in the disk drive all the time, when you're running the jailbreak, and it has to spin up and spin down every time it's crashing and restarting, then I guess you could, because more wear and tear on the drive over time because of that. But just don't have a disk in your drive when you're running the jailbreak, and then that's not really an issue. So generally, it's not really gonna cause much problems. But when it comes to the software, there is a chance. It is very rare, but there is a chance that the operating system can get corrupted during one of these crashes. And when that happens, when you boot the console back up again, it will just boot into its safe mode. Sometimes you can just restart the PS5 and other times it will be stuck in safe mode because the operating system is corrupted. And you'll have to basically install either a system software update or a recovery firmware. In order to fix it, usually it requires a full recovery firmware, which you can download from dark software. You just download the recovery firmware for the same firmware version that your console's on, so it doesn't update it to a higher firmware. And then you can just install that recovery firmware from a USB drive by selecting the reinstall system software option in safe mode. With a USB plugged in, and it will install that recovery firmware, basically reinstall all of the hard drive files, so that it will properly boot back up again. So that's a pretty rare issue. But it can happen, and even if it is fixable by restoring a recovery firmware from a USB. So yeah, that issue is fixable. Another issue that is more common, still quite rare, is a database rebuild. And this can occur during a crash as well. This can also occur not when you're crashing, but you know, if some payload has messed up in some way, it could cause a database rebuild. When a database rebuild occurs, it does not add all of your homebrew applications and fake packages back to the database, because it does not see those as valid applications. So it just adds all of your retail stuff back to the database. So when you turn on your console after a database rebuild happens, it looks like all of your stuff has been reset, because you don't have your homebrew or your fake packages installed anymore. They are actually still installed. They're just not indexed in the database. So you can either just reinstall them or use a database rebuild, which basically uses FTP to see what applications you have installed, and if any are not in the database, will add them back to it. So that is another issue that can appear that is fixable, which is more common but still quite rare overall. I have had a few random database rebuilds that have happened on my over the years. So those are a couple of real issues that can appear from jailbreaking your console that you otherwise would not likely I run into anyway. Moving on from that, the last question that always gets asked here whenever I make a new jailbreaking is people asking about jailbreaking the latest firmware or a higher firmware than what is currently jailbreakable. At the moment, there's not any new jailbreaks for 8.0 or 8.20 on the horizon right now. Obviously, anything could happen, something could come out tomorrow. We just don't know, but at the moment, there doesn't look like there's anything major coming for in the PS5. Short term. And for the people asking for a jailbreak on the very latest jailbreaking firmware, probably isn't for because you're keeping the console up to date, most likely to access PSN, because you need your console on the latest firmware to play on PlayStation's network. And every time a new security vulnerability is discovered, that could potentially lead to a jailbreak. Sony patches it and releases a new which you then update to access PSN. And then you're not able to jailbreak it again. So that is the problem generally. What people do is if they want to access PSN, they'll buy two consoles. They'll buy one for accessing PSN that they keep up to date, and then they'll have another console that they just put in the closet. Wait until a jailbreak is available for whatever firmware that console was on, and they do not update it. So that is the general idea there. If you want to jailbreak your console, it needs to be on an old firmware. You must not update it, and you must just basically leave it until a jailbreak comes out for that firmware. Because jailbreaks on the latest firmwares are extremely rare, practically non-existent. So obviously, you know if your console's on the latest firmware jail.